So we've now had confirmation that we're getting bigger bases when it comes to Warhammer the Old World, and this is a significant difference from what we've seen in all the previous editions, and what I want to talk about here are the pros and the cons, so let's do it. The first one is pretty damn obvious because they mentioned it in the article. Basically, units are going to rank up a little bit more easily. Some units typically in some armies have been an absolute pain to rank up. You build them, you think everything's perfect, everything's hunky-dory, then you try and put them together and there's elbows banging, spears banging, all kinds of weirdness, and when you try and play with them and get them in the tray, they don't really work very well. Obviously, the hope is to try and eliminate that. Now, some units, that's a problem, and that will obviously probably look better on the new bases, but for other units, probably like my Dark Elves that I'm building, they're actually quite compact. They fit reasonably nicely on a 20mm base because they're all sort of regimented. I suspect some units will look better and some units probably won't, but I think it's probably a necessary evil either way. Now, the obvious main downside to all of that is that a lot of people are going to feel pressured to rebase if they already have an army, or they will want to use the spacer trays. Now, of course, one option is to simply not do that, but it sounds like you won't be able to play competitive play, and we'll talk about that in a moment. But rebasing, quite simply, pain in the backside. People sort of did it when they went from fantasy to the Age of Sigmar, and they didn't really enjoy doing that. And then there's people who didn't do that, now maybe have to rebase from 20mm to 25mm, and then everything else a little bit up. Yeah, it's going to be a bit of a pain in the backside. The alternative is to use the spacer trays, which are basically a tray that will fit the 20mm bases in, but the whole tray will take up the right size and be effectively as though you had a 25mm base. Now, that's not perfect because you will have to make it so that the base blends in with the bases on your troops, but it'll work for most of the issues. There's the question of what do you do when people start dying, you take more off, but whatever, it's okay. And then a pro that I'm sure Games Workshop are very happy about is that they will now just simply sell you Age of Sigmar models for use with Warhammer the Old World. The new Lizardmen, the new Warriors of Chaos, I said at the time that they are very likely just going to try and sell you those and have you use them for the Old World, and we were a little bit confused because the models are a little bit bigger. It would be very difficult to rank them up on the base size that we expected them to be on. Now, increasing the base size means they don't really have to worry about that quite as much. There's also the advantage that maybe they will actually make it so that your round bases will fit on a tray. I believe that 25mm round bases might be the smallest that they have. Oh, what's that? Now the smallest base you have is a 25mm square. Yes, with a little bit of awkwardness, that will fit together quite easily. If, for example, the Warriors of Chaos go from 25mm to 32mm, which may or may not be the size of the Age of Sigmar base, I actually have no idea, then lo and behold, a tray with circles in it might be on the way, might be being sold by Games Workshop. They will be thrilled. You might not be because the price of the Warriors of Chaos are quite high, but there was no way in my mind that they were going to sell you two different types of the same unit. A cheaper one for Warhammer the Old World and a more expensive one for Age of Sigmar. I couldn't see it, and I still now don't see it. There's a little bit of a con with that in that we might also get scale creep. Basically, everything's getting bigger, but I don't really see this as a problem. Generally, it's something that's quite gradual. And unless you're actually going to get 2 miniatures of two different units and compare them directly and be like, well, this guy's head is 5mm and this guy's is 4mm or whatever, then I don't really think most people will notice, especially on a tabletop where it's 3 feet away from you. I just don't think it's that big of an issue myself. I do think though that because the unit sizes are basically going to get bigger, it might look more impressive on the table. It might not, I might be completely wrong about that, but basically the same number of models are going to take up a bigger area. That might make the game feel a little bit more epic. Or I might have the complete opposite effect where you might think there's a lot of models there taking up a lot of space. It's not really realistic. I don't really know how we'll feel about that until we actually see it, so I'm going to hold off a little bit of judgment there. The downside as well as that is that it could actually be more awkward to maneuver. There's bigger units going through smaller spaces, all the terrain's the same kind of size. It might be a little bit more awkward to maneuver, but again, I want to see how it's played. And the next con is basically now people have to make a decision between the old ages of Warhammer and the new age of Warhammer the Old World. Yes, the old and new may be getting a little bit confused. It's probably a little bit easier to upscale your bases, so to have a slaughter base that goes from 20mm to 25mm. It feels awfully harder to go from 25mm to 20mm if you want to play a new edition army and play it in 7th edition or something like that. For a lot of people, they're just going to play the new stuff and they're just going to rebase and just carry on with whatever the new edition says, and those people will be happy. But if you do want to play the old editions, you might struggle to find people. If you had a little friends group and basically let's say there's 4 of you and 3 of them want to play the new edition and they're just going to be like, well, I'm going to rebase, and know you're the only one on the smaller bases, you can still play. Sure, you can play the new edition for sure. They said you can do it as a sort of casual. Doesn't sound like you'll be able to do it in a competitive environment. It sounds like they're going to enforce the bigger bases at a competitive environment, and that would make sense. But yeah, it's going to be a little bit awkward for those people who want to keep playing the old editions. You can just obviously use spacer trays, and maybe that's the way you should go. But you might find less people to play against, and that might be a little bit awkward. And there is, as I alluded to there, possibly a competitive difference. If you want to stick with the old size and go to competitions and play with your friends and stuff like that, you've got a few different issues and a few different questions to answer. Templates is one that springs to my mind. Templates even on the tray spaces might be a little bit weird because technically the gap in between those models, half of it applies to one of the models and half of it applies to the other model. Let's say the template is like right over the edge. It's going to be very hard to delineate which model is actually being affected. Obviously, if the templates start changing size, there's some pros and cons to that. The bigger bases, technically the template will hit a few less models. That might be a little bit of a nerf to templated weapons, by the way. And then there's a question about how many rank up against how many other people can you attack. Now, I saw an image that sort of suggested for most cases it's not really going to be a problem, but it's all going to get a little bit strange with that one, and I don't really know where they'll go. They could try and simplify it to be like only the first 2 rows could attack, but then what happens if you have a horde of like 30 models long again? Can they all attack even though they can't quite hit? All a little bit weird. I think ultimately there will be some small differences there, but for the people who are actually going to try and do that with different size bases, it might be more awkward than we know. Might be dead simple. But yeah, there's some obvious questions to answer there. I think in tournaments, they're just going to make it so you need to have the right base size. Or you use the spacer trays that Games Workshop are probably going to sell you. And I suspect they'll have lines in them so you can actually tell where the template should go. Now, those were my thoughts on this issue. I saw a video from Dr. Luke Blaxill. He spoke about a lot of the same things I did, but probably in a much smarter way. The man seems incredibly intelligent, and I'm pretty sure he did it without editing, which obviously just blows my mind in this day and age. I'm too old for that. But his channel is absolutely great. You should check him out anyway. I'll leave a link to his channel in the description. Now, 2 little things that I did miss in my immediate reaction. I did not see that we are getting Knights on Foot. It's nice to see that those are coming back. I think they had them in the early ages, but when I was playing, they actually didn't exist. But that was big, but I think the base size issue was a little bit bigger. And the return of the Lance formation with the Bretonians. If I'm honest, I don't really like it, but I can see why people do. In my mind, I don't know if the Lance formation was ever used, ever it's realistic or something. It almost assuredly was in the history of all of human combat, but I just sort of envision films where it's sort of like a wave of horses. In my head, I just sort of prefer that. Either way, I miss those 2 things. And we spoke about them now, so let's move on. If you want to support the channel, then becoming a Patreon is truly the best way. Other than that, I hope you have a most beautiful day. Like and subscribe. Goodbye.